Hey YouTube, I guess I'm supposed to say ballers. Today is going to be an interesting video. Some of you may agree with me, some of you may disagree with you, some of you may think I'm crazy, and some of you already do. And that's okay, but today what we're going to talk about is live feeding versus frozen thawed feeding. So first, let me let you know that does mean you are going to see some feeds in this video. Hopefully, if all goes well, you'll see two. One live, one frozen thawed. And we're going to talk about the advantages and disadvantages to both, because both do have advantages and disadvantages, right? There's no one perfect answer for everybody. It depends on your situation, where you're at in your breeding hobby, and a whole host of a lot of other things. So we're going to kind of cover that, why we do what we do, why we did what we used to do, and why we're going to do what we do in the future. Yeah, I think that's everything. So for our first demonstration is going to be about live feeding. Now, in this case, we're not feeding a ball python, but as you know, we do feed our ball pythons live. But I figured you guys might enjoy seeing something different. So we're going to have this little winged rat, and we're going to go right down here to this little scaleless rattlesnake. And we're going to see how he does. Whoop. You got to make those sounds when you put them in, too. Whoop. It's important. He's eyeballing it. And there he is. Now, let's see if he makes that bite. While he's looking at that, let's talk about a couple of the positives to live feeding and a couple of the negatives. One of the negatives is, of course, if you're using a large rat. I do believe the strike happened. And again, there's always the ability for the rat to bite the snake. In this case, not a big worry, because it's not one that's got very developed mouth or anything like that. And as you can see, rattlesnakes aren't going to put up with that. So, but in ball pythons, if you leave it be and you don't watch it or monitor, take care of it, that can absolutely happen. So it is something you got to be mindful of. And when I say don't leave it unattended, we'll often put a rat in a box or in a tub and close it. But we're right there, we're listening, you can hear what's going on. You don't want to leave that in there for hours upon hours. You want to let it go for 10 to 15 minutes and then check on it. If you hear a bite coil, check on it. Those sorts of things. That's kind of the best way to feed live, because that really, to me, is the biggest downfall, is that chance. Now, Kurt, how many live feedings do you think we've done over the last several years?
We probably feed, 80 to 100 snakes a week.
52 weeks a year. So you're talking, we've literally done this thousands of times. Thousands. Say that with me. Thousands. How many problems have we had?
Maybe one, I don't know.
Yeah, like zero. I had one when I was 17, and it was from a rat kicking a snake, not even biting it. Everything's been very minor. It's been very well. So the idea that if you do feed live, it's gonna chew your snake up automatically, no, it's not. That only happens in horrible situations when people don't do it right. The rest of the time, is there a chance of a bite? Sure, but it's pretty minimal. Again, we've done this thousands of times. Not saying it can't happen, but I'm saying in our experience, it's just not been the facts. Now, something else about live feeding. I do want to point this out because it is a big thing for a lot of people, and I totally understand. Some people aren't comfortable with what just happened. And if you can look, that rat's still in the process of dying. That's why. It's going to get helped along there, it sounds like. Here's the kicker. Constrictors actually are going to kill faster than most venomous bites. Not all. I've seen venomous drop it like that. But I've also seen venomous take a while. Constriction, according to studies, does not kill by what we were taught in school, like you just can't breathe. It actually kills from a heart attack from the blood pressure flow. Thanks for the backup band. But it's going to be a fairly quick death. However, some people don't want to see that. It hurts them. It bothers them. And I understand. If you're sensitive to that, then feeding live, this is kind of a negative, right? To feeding live, because you're going to have to watch an animal suffer. You're going to have to watch an animal die. You feed frozen thawed, unless you're making your own. You're not going to have that same experience. I see you. We're going to go ahead and slide that on there and put the latch on a second. You're not going to have that same experience of having to watch that take place. So that's definitely a benefit to feeding frozen thawed over feeding live. All right. Any other negatives you can think of, Kurt, for feeding live?
If your snake doesn't eat, what you do with the live rodent then?
Oh, yeah. If you only have one snake and your snake doesn't eat, you end up kind of keeping that rodent like a de facto weird pet that you're probably going to feed off next week, which can be kind of difficult and kind of hard to do for some people. And many people end up with a pet rat because they get attached to it and just can't do it, which I totally understand. The other thing I would say is a disadvantage is price. If you're only feeding 1 or 2 snakes and you're going to the store all the time and you're buying a live rodent, that can be kind of expensive as opposed to if you're buying in bulk and frozen thawed, which we'll cover in a little while. However, price can also be a benefit. If you have a large collection and you're feeding live because you're breeding your own rodents, it doesn't cost you any extra to feed live. You don't have to have a big deep freeze. You don't have to have a gas chamber. You don't have to have any of that you will for frozen thawed, which will cover all of that as well. All right, guys, that kind of covers the advantages and disadvantages for feeding live. So let's slide on over to the other temporary facility, feed something frozen thawed, and we'll cover those. Now let's take a look at frozen thawed. And again, there's advantages and disadvantages to everything. Let's start with a disadvantage. That's right, we're waiting. Waiting sucks. And you have to thaw them out. So they're not ready to go right when you're ready to go. So you got to plan that. And that means you got to either put them under a heat lamp, or we like to use hot water. That's what I've always used. But you have to thaw them out, get them up to temp, make them not an ice block. That to me is a major disadvantage. It's more of a commitment of time. 2 is waste. So let's say I take this rat-a-tat here and I feed him to our snake here. And our snake says, I don't want to eat that today. Piss off. Well, if that happens, then what do I do with that rat? Do I refreeze it? Some will tell you you shouldn't refreeze at all. Some will tell you it's okay to refreeze once. I have refrozen. I don't know. It probably sounds like a Disney sequel. I have done that before, but I'll tell you on stronger snakes, like my old female carpet who passed away, she would literally blow that rat apart. So it was kind of I didn't like to give her refreezes. If you thaw it out too quick, she'd blow it apart. So that's a disadvantage. Definitely a problem. So you got to thaw it out, you got to wait, and you got to hope you don't have waste. What are some of the advantages to frozen? Well, this right here. I mean, if we had this in a bin or had to keep this alive or had to go buy rats all the time, that would really suck. Since we breed, we have that availability. We actually made these ourselves. But you can see there's a ton of rats in here, so I can have a whole lot of food in a small package that I keep in my deep freeze. So there's a convenience factor. Well, thawing them out sucks balls. This is really nice, especially if you have a collection of maybe, say, 10 snakes, and you're going to thaw out 7 or 8 rats to try to get through those 10 snakes. You can do that all pretty easily without having to bring home a whole bunch of rats. So there is definitely a convenience factor. That brings us to another thing. If you're in a small collection, let's say, I'd say 10 and in. Kurt can correct me if I'm wrong on when the best time to start breeding is, and that'll probably be a Patreon video at one point in time. But, it's really expensive to go buy live. If you're not breeding your own, you got to find a local supplier, which means either a pet shop that specializes in reptiles or some guy who's breeding his own and is going to charge you whatever the price he wants. Where frozen, you can order from one of the large companies, right? Like there's a whole ton of them. There's Perfect Prey, there's Rodent Pro, there's all kinds out there. I personally have used Rodent Pro in the past, and you can order in bulk. And we'd put together an order, we'd fill an entire box to save on shipping, and we'd get these rats at a lot lower rate than I could buy live when I had just a handful of snakes. The other advantage is we live close to Kansas City. Rodent Pro goes to the Kansas City show. I could actually set it up where I could call them up, be like, hey man, this is what I want. I'll pick it up in KC, go to the show, check things out, take my rats home, and never pay shipping. So you can also do that. Just be prepared to keep them frozen on the drive home, right? So a little bit of dry ice in the cooler should be good to go. So there are definitely some advantages to that on cost and price. You're going to save a lot of money buying frozen than you are over live at a certain size. Now, I think it kind of flip-flops down the road, because when you get bigger and you need more, then it's cheaper to produce your own rats by far and even make your own frozen if you need, as opposed to purchasing. But making your own frozen, there's more equipment than you need just in breeding rats. So when we breed rats, we need rat racks to make our own frozen. We're going to need a chamber we're going to have to build. We're going to need CO2 gas. We're going to need a deep freeze to put them in afterwards. We're going to need baggies. You're like, oh, that sounds pretty cheap, but it's still stuff you got to buy. So I think these price savings, it really depends on your size. But most keepers probably aren't doing what we're doing, and they're going to probably save money doing frozen thawed. The other advantage is, if you're squeamish about watching the snake kill the rat, you don't have to do it this way, right? You're never going to see that happen. It's already dead. Pretty easy, correct? You don't have to worry about the rat biting the snake. Some will also tell you disease, that there's an advantage to frozen thawed because they're not going to carry disease. And here's what I'm getting at. If you want to go back through history and man, you got to dig up in the way back to get some old forums that will tell you about a huge issue that came with frozen rats that was killing off snakes, that caused one large company, even I do believe it actually was Rodent Pro, but don't quote me on that, they had to like purge their collection and kind of restart because the guy that was surviving freezing. So disease can happen in all scenarios. I'm going to tell you the safest way to avoid disease is breed your own rats. Because if you breed your own rats and you feed diseased rats to your snake, guess whose fault it is? That's right, it's yours. When you're buying from somebody else, you're kind of taking a risk no matter what you do, right? So let's see how this works. So the rat should be warm to the touch. This one is, especially when dealing with pythons because they have the heat pits and things like that. You should probably use a pair of tongs. I'm not going to, because I know this snake, and this is the best way for him to eat. Come here, buddy. So I don't have to do much with it. There you go. Take care of the rest. So the frozen thawed feed works just like that. Silence. You don't hear squealing like you did with the venomous. I don't have to worry about my python getting bit. So there are certain advantages. So then, the next logical question is, what do we do and why do we do it? We do some of both, but we do mainly live. The reasons for that are, well, let's start with the reasons why we do some frozen. He won't eat live. I've tried, he won't do it. He prefers frozen, and it's all about your snake, right? So my snake prefers frozen, my snake gets frozen. Boom, that's what happens. I've had snakes that won't eat frozen, and they got live, even when I was buying frozen in bulk. So you got to take care of the individual snake first. The other reason we do frozen, this time of year, snakes aren't eating very well because we're going through a lot of breeding, right? And then later on in the year, we're going to have a lot of babies who are eating a lot of the baby rats. So our rat production is going to stay like this, but our feed rate does this. So what I tend to do is we tend to save up some frozen, and when our breeding for our rat production's here, but our snake's needs are up here, we may take some of our more aggressive females and feed off 10 to 15 frozen a week to help our rat production not dip and help supply, because we supply the whole area, not just ourselves. So this is kind of like a squirrel saving up for winter, right? That's what we're doing there. We'll use frozen thawed for that method. Now, why do we use live for the rest? Well, first and foremost is convenience. When you have a collection this size, to thaw out this many rats, to keep them warm while you're going through and feeding, to do all those things would add hours upon hours upon hours to our feed day that we just, quite honestly, don't have with working day jobs. You may disagree with that, but that's the truth. Convenience is a big factor. 2, no waste. If my snake doesn't eat all the rats that Kurt brings, he takes them back and he puts them back in the colony. So we're never wasting a rat. Well, I shouldn't say never. Occasionally one gets wasted, but it's pretty rare. And a frozen would get wasted then too. With frozen, we do have waste. We can't refreeze that a second time. If it's been thawed too long, I end up having to get rid of it, and then it died for absolutely nothing. 3 is our successive feeding. If you look, a lot of our snakes who are shy, we can put that in, we can close it up, and they're more likely to eat in that scenario than they are with me doing this, With me doing this with a tongue, going, oh, hey, snake, eat. Sometimes that's going to make some of them not want to eat. Where a live rodent, they'll take care of that. So we have a greater success rate with our feeds. So for us, we do live feeding for the convenience, the success rate, and the less waste. Now let me tell you something though. When we only had about 10 to 15 snakes before we started breeding our own, we fed predominantly frozen thawed. And the reason was cost. It's not that big of a deal to thaw out 15. It is to thaw out 75, okay? But 15, we could do that in an evening. We'd set the rats to thaw, we'd play cards, drink a few beers, then we'd go feed snakes. It was actually kind of a fun evening. And we were buying in bulk to save money because we weren't going to pay the pet store prices. So we actually switched what we did because of the size of our collection and what we found that our goals were. And that's how I can honestly say, too, that I know I have better success rate feeding live than I do feeding frozen. I'm not talking out my ass. I've been there. I've done both. And I've predominantly used both methods at different times in my career. But for what's best for you, you have to make that decision. I can't make it for you. What I am going to tell you is be open to either one being best for you and be open to change if the time comes for change. But first and foremost, make sure you're doing what's best for your individual snake. I have a freezer full of rats because of that snake right there, and I always will. Kurt, anything you want to add, anything I missed?
No.
All right, guys, we're going to switch over to Patreon and get a little more in detail about price breakdowns and how you can save money on your rat. So if you're not a Patreon member, you should be, because that's going to be pretty interesting to put Kurt on the spot. All right, guys, thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.